Do women expect men to know what to do sexually?
Unfortunately, yes, they do. You just want somebody to know. You're looking to be rescued in some way. You're looking for somebody to get you. You're looking for this romantic idea of things just flowing without needing to talk about it. Unfortunately, it's not like that. I do find that men expect women to just know as well. Having the confidence in getting it wrong, knowing that every single woman's different and what worked for your last partner doesn't mean it's going to work for this one. And rather than seeing that as like a negative, this is like an opportunity for exploration and play and curiosity.
Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less. Less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. And today I'm going to talk about a topic that, basically every man that I speak to and work with wants more of. And that's sexual confidence, right? Well, sexual confidence, having better sex, initiating sex. We talk a lot of different really juicy topics here with me and Carla, someone I've known for a little while. She, as I mentioned, she was on part of Cam Fraser's cohort of his sex coaching program he runs. And Cam Fraser is someone who's been a guest on the podcast, and I'm pretty sure he'll be a guest again in the not too distant future as well. And she has a real love for men, like a real compassion towards men, and a real breadth of knowledge when it comes to men's sexual needs and men's sexual fears and men's sexual worries and men's sexual desires. She does a lot of work with men around erectile dysfunction, or erectile disappointment, as she prefers to call it, because, it's not a dysfunction, because for most of us men, when we have issues around our erections, it's usually not actually a disorder or a dysfunction of any type. Yeah, I want to say that, men. If you struggle with erection sometimes, everyone does. Every man I know does. So in this episode, we talk a lot about the myths of sexual confidence, like what blocks men from having sexual confidence, how we can build sexual confidence, the sort of questions you can ask a woman that you're with, right, to learn more about her desire and what she enjoys and what she likes. Carla gives a lot of really beautiful insight about how women feel about sex. We answer a question about how, what do women expect from men? Do they expect them to read their minds and so forth? So we really get into, things like sexual needs and desires. How can you figure out what your own sexual needs are and desires are? Like, how can you figure out someone else's with them? There's a lot of different things that we talk about. And we kind of finish up talking about initiating sex. And I know initiating sex is something that a lot of men fear and worry about, especially in relationship and not exclusively in relationship. And then when we don't initiate sex, often our relationships start to suffer because of that. So we really get into deep detail about, the ways in which you can start to initiate sex more and create more sex in your relationship. That's also a big part of this episode as well. So there's not much more to say, really, other than, if you're listening to this and sexual confidence and having better sex in a relationship is something that, you want more, especially if you're a man who, you lean towards the attachment style of being avoidant and you just kind of back away from sex. You feel worried about it and you don't want to approach it, or you're, maybe burying your head in the sand a little about it, then definitely get in contact with me, because it's something I really love to work with men around, breaking the cycles of avoidance, because I've done it myself and I've helped other men do it as well. But, and as I always say, without further ado, I'll let you jump into the episode. Welcome, listeners. Welcome to this very juicy episode, because you've just listened to the intro, so you kind of know what we're going to talk about, so I don't need to say it again. And I have a wonderful guest with me today, a woman who I've known for a while now, and it all started out with an email. She just reached out to me because I did some work with one of my former guests, and probably someone who will come on the podcast again pretty soon, Cam Fraser, for his amazing sex coaching course. For some reason, I just can't remember his name, but there's an amazing sex coaching course which he runs, and he asked me to do a little piece in there about dating. So I did a little workshop for the people there to help with the men that they're going to be coaching around dating. And this lovely lady reached out to me. We've kept in contact, and just before we got on, we talked for half an hour quite effortlessly, and realized that we should probably start recording. And she's an absolute powerhouse, a woman who loves men as well. It's something that we've really taken from our conversations, and I think that's really important when we're going to talk about this topic around men and sex and sexual confidence. How are you doing, Carla?
Hi, David. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a couple of years ago now that I reached out to you. So I remember there wasn't something quite working properly on your website because I was having a good look around, and I thought, oh gosh, I really need to let him know, because people be wanting to get work and work with him, and he won't know. And so I remember that. And then we connected a bit on Instagram, and then I had you come and have a chat about the men's perspective as well around oral sex. So so we've had some exchanges, and it's been really interesting to see your work and follow your work on Instagram. And also recently on LinkedIn, I see that you are connected to somebody that I've recently connected to in supporting men becoming allies as well. So that was really interesting to see that connection. So it's funny how paths are crossing, and so thank you for inviting me on.
No, my pleasure. Sometimes it feels like it's a small world in this work.
Yeah, it does.
It does. And I thought, before we get into the meat of the episode, I actually don't know the full answer to this question, so I'm really intrigued in it. It's like, what was your journey to do the work that you do now, and also really, as well as moving into really honing on and wanting to support men as well?
So with regards to like relationship and sex coaching, I'd gone through my own self-development coming out of chronic anxiety. So I was in a really, really bad place, and I had been introduced to tools like boundaries. I'd never heard of the word boundaries until I'd gone on this women's retreat and learnt about inner child, and started doing a lot of my own self-development, learning about trauma, somatic work to heal trauma, and read a lot of books and supporting myself through that. And then decided, life is quite good right now, but maybe it could be really amazing. And I really wanted to help people move forward. Like, I'd done lots of like talk therapy and felt in a way that kept me back, and coaching seemed a good way to sort of support people moving forward. So, and at the time I was married, and I felt like my sex life could be better. So I did a training to be a sex lover and relationship coach. And I thought I can take the tools and the skills for the coaching and apply that to support women who are mothers, who are, similar situation to myself, experiencing anxiety, overwhelm, and I can support them. And then all of the sex and relationship stuff I can use for my own benefit. But then within the first 3 or 4 months of that training, there was such a deep dive into sort of my own patterns. Also, I grew up Catholic with a Southern Italian heritage, so all of the conditioning that brings. And I was like, oh my goodness, this work is really amazing and really important. And so I did start supporting mums initially along more the relationship element and sex element. And because I became very, very aware of, like, as a human being, and I have my own inner child, and I have my own stuff that I bring to a relationship, I was able then to see it happening in everybody, and that included men. So in my conversations with women, I would always bring their awareness of maybe how they're speaking to their partner, and then, maybe what their partner might be experiencing or how they might be feeling in that situation. So just encouraging women to have that compassion. And these conversations often happen on Facebook and other situations where other people were sort of watching, observing. And then I started to get more fathers actually reaching out to me, and I started doing work there around the forgotten father, which is something that we had been talking about, just before we hit record. And even though I was very much aware of seeing a man and his own experience and really understanding, what he might be sharing from his perspective, I understood that there was like conditioning and lots of things going on in the background that maybe I wouldn't know fully or understand, because I have, the conditioning and the experience of a woman. And so I had been following Cam Fraser actually for quite a while on Instagram and really loved like the science element of it, knowing as well that a lot of the men that I was speaking to, wanted they wanted to like get proper grounded information and scientific stuff. Rather than just coming from a place of intuition where I felt I could relate to women in that way. Men like needed proof almost. And I thought, Cam's training would be the best way of doing that. And so I did that year, and it was such an amazing year to do that work. And, I still meet with Cam monthly. So all of the people that I did his training, we meet monthly. And just the men in the group that did the training with me, their like vulnerability in sharing really intimate parts of themselves as human beings, their sexuality, their own sexual journey, and also noticing sort of how my own journey sort of in a way coincided with their experiences. So noticing my growth and how I perceived men, seeing how men sort of in my 20s were behaving, and understanding that I had taken it all very personally to mean something about me, when they were all taking everything that I was doing also very personally about them. And, the conditioning that I received as a woman and how I should be behaving, seeing that the pressures that men were experiencing. And, it's interesting because, and we talked about this as well just before hitting record, there's an element of, especially in my late teens and early 20s, I really did see men as like a threat in some way, and doing my own internal work around myself and my own stuff helped me to work through that, hold better space, and also have more compassion. Because I really do feel that the greater compassion that you have for yourself, the easier it is to have compassion for the people. Because when we experience that shame, when we experience those parts of ourselves where we may feel guilty or we've done bad, like I'm a bad person, if you can hold yourself in that and go, I'm not really, I just made a mistake, or, I'm not showing up in the best way possible, but I can always change it and do something differently. When you can hold yourself in that, then you can see that in the person opposite you, whether that's a man or a woman. And so, yeah, and I think that ability to be able to do that is what has enabled me to then be able to support men in a better way as well, because I'm able to hold space better, and especially when I'm working with couples as well. It's, explaining to women in front of the man why it might be difficult for him to share and open up, explaining that the man feels seen, and the woman quite often is like, oh, actually, that really makes sense. And it coming from a woman, and I think that's why it's easy for me to advocate for men in women's spaces, because I'm a woman, I'm easy to relate to, I can talk about my own difficulties. And this is something that, another thing that we were talking about, I think it's easier for a woman to advocate for men, and it's easy for men, to advocate for women when they're speaking to men. And I see, part of the work that I do is not just supporting men, but also being in women's spaces and educating women around men and men's sexuality, and the conditioning that men experience.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I see this in some of the work that I do with, me and my partner. Also, we do some couples work. And it really blows me away the amount of times that we all do this, right? It's not just a man-woman thing. It's a thing that humans do, is we are having our experience and our emotions and our reactions, and we place very fixed meaning on the other person, our partner in this example. Like, they're doing this thing because of X. They're doing it to me because they are cruel, mean, selfish, ungrateful, and they think about me that I am and we have a very fixed way, and then we receive everything they do through the lens of what we believe. And so often we never ask them the question, like, why do you do that thing? Why do you say it in that way? Or we don't even get curious to get underneath that, because someone might give us an answer like, oh, it doesn't really matter. When you do that, I just think X. And we've so rarely, I say never, but I love to remove that word from my vocabulary. We very rarely, right, in relationship go, oh, so why do you think that thing? And we get to like, oh, I think the man might say, I think that thing because, well, my dad always told me that that's how I should be as a man. Or, when I did the opposite to that, my dad beat me or he shouted at me or blah, blah, blah. We just take the meaning we want and we never get to the true meaning. And it causes so much strife and conflict, so much difficulty, whether that's a relational sense or whether that's sexually as well, because we are, and this is the essence of kind of projecting. We have our own idea of what the person's doing, and then we decide that's what they're doing, that's what they mean. And we create so much difficulty in our relationship because we're not actually curious. And then when we project out on a larger scale, as you're saying, is, I work with predominantly men, and I see how men are always talking about women. And I had a dating program I ran recently, I mentioned before. And the men were talking about women in this way that like dating is really easy for women because, they're women, they just show up and men are flocking towards them. And I was like, okay, so like you're only looking at it from a very particular lens. Like let's zoom that out. Like you're a woman and all these men who are this size trying to approach you in a bar, like would that get irritating for you? And we started to kind of unpack that. And they were like, wow, I've never thought of it that way. I've only been looking at it from the way that I thought it was. And it's great when you're in a group of people who are willing to do that, right? Because that's sometimes just being willing to see someone else's point of view and be compassionate, understanding means that we have to let go of something ourselves. And I imagine you've also seen this in your work where it can be very difficult for us to let go of that meaning that we've decided that we've placed on someone else, or the projection that we have of someone else or a whole group or gender of other people.
Yeah, exactly that. And I'd like to actually speak to an example that me and my partner have had recently, and it is around that. So there was this feeling for me of, so we planned a weekend. It wasn't working out how we initially envisaged it. So we were going to spend like the weekend together, and we'd had to like make plans to see other people. And, I felt really disappointed and frustrated, and I voiced that disappointment and frustration. And he's, so we've like got this agreement. We call it the couple bubble. It's from Stan Tatkin. And so, my thing is I need to share what I'm feeling. So this is part of my agreement, so that I don't leave him guessing. So I'm not withdrawing, silent treatment, going in myself, because then that creates anxiety in him. So I need to let him know what I'm feeling when I'm feeling it. And, his sort of deal in that couple bubble is that he will hold my shares with loving and without judgment, and not, take it so personally. And so I had shared, and he had tried to sort of rationalize, but we've still got this time, we've still got that time. And I felt really frustrated and not seen. And anyway, it escalated into something it really didn't need to. And then, we were today having a discussion around it. And, I was reasonably of the idea of, I should be able to share my feelings and thoughts, and he should hold that, because that's the right thing to do. And to a certain extent, yes, it is the right thing to do. But with further inquiry, the two of us, because the commitment that I have made is I cannot change the other person, and this is something that I remind the couples that I work with, and even individuals as well. I can't change the person. Is there something in that I could do and change and do differently? And with further exploration together, we recognize that there is this inner child piece for me that has come up before. And I had an attachment coach a few months ago, and I had discussed it with her, but this had left my memory until literally today when we were talking about it. And it was this like idea of things not being fair. And so this inner child piece came up, and it's like, it's not fair. And what had upset my partner was, she's so frustrating when she has this conversation about this particular topic, because she's childlike. And so we came to the realization that this is my inner child piece, fully my responsibility. So moving forward, I need to recognize that if I'm too involved in it in that moment, then it's his responsibility. Well, not responsibility, but we made the agreement that he will bring awareness to the fact of, is this the inner child piece of it's not fair coming up right now? And then I can be responsible for that. And it is, there's that communication, that sense of safety, but then also, you know, where did I need to let go there? I needed to let go of the idea that I was right, that he should be listening to me. And where is it that I could change and do differently? And it felt uncomfortable to do that, because there's still that part of me that goes, well, he should still be listening. But at the same time, where am I not showing up in the best way? And I was letting my inner child come out in that part of that discussion. And she's my responsibility to take care of and look after, not my partner's. So, so as you were speaking, it was like, oh my goodness, that just is so relevant to what I experienced this morning.
Yeah, the responsibility for our communication it can be a difficult one to kind of accept, isn't it? We want someone else to do the work for us, so we can just like freely express our emotions, and then they can be like, yeah, I hear everything, and what I'm hearing is this, and dissect it and make sense of it, and then we can go, oh great, yeah, that's it, you've really got me, thank you, and then move on. And we don't want them to have any emotional reaction themselves.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's, you know, where I needed to take responsibility of the fact of maybe there will be things that I'm not being responsible for, and that are valid for me to show up differently, you know. So, and, you know, my attachment style is leaning more to anxious. So my tendency is to want to overshare as a means of connection. So even though I check in with that to not necessarily share things that I don't really need to share. So I remember my attachment coach saying to me about not treating my partner as a therapist. So, you know, being responsible for myself and choosing what I share. So being mindful and being aware of like what it is that I'm choosing, whose responsibility is it to hold this, and bringing awareness to that. So, which is a continuous learning process, of course.
This feeds nicely into, you know, talking about this piece around sexual confidence for men, because we have so much conditioning as men around sexual confidence and how we should be as men and how we should show up. And I imagine you see this with your clients very often. You know how they. You know, I was on a podcast yesterday and we talked about stereotype of men being like, men should be aggressive and men should be dominating and men should be providers and all these things. And it was like, wow, that's a really small way of being for men, as we have to be. But I see how this kind of leaks into men's sex, men's sexual confidence. And I want to start by asking, like, what do you see as the blockers to men being sexually confident?
One of the biggest ones, I think, is not being able to share with their friends and also, you know, their partners, their own sexual thoughts, their own sexual journey, their own sexual vulnerabilities. And, you know, and this idea of like faking it or looking like you are something. And so I have like a client who's recently started with me, and on the intake call, he was sharing the fact that he'd started using Viagra and got into the habit of using it. So he's come to me with performance anxiety. It's not erectile dysfunction. I prefer to like refer to like performance anxiety or erectile disappointment, just because, you know, the moment that a man gets into his head and starts overthinking and worrying, then of course, you know, erection loss is almost guaranteed. So it's not like there's like a dysfunction of sort. It's more like psychosomatic getting into the head. And he was talking to, I can't remember if he said it was his brother or his friend, but he was talking to somebody and they had encouraged that, saying, well, whatever you do, you need to maintain your erection. So keep taking the Viagra. Don't let her see that you can't perform. And yeah, I think it's that pressure that a lot of men can experience from their friends, you know, that they can't share those things. And if one of their friends feels uncomfortable around their own sexuality and doesn't feel comfortable in their own vulnerability, rather than offering their friend the opportunity to speak and open up, they'll just shut it down because they don't want to go there themselves. And so that inability to be able to talk to friends, and then also inability to talk to their partner, because I think, a lot of women, and this is, I think we were saying as well just before we hit record, that unfortunately sometimes women aren't always approaching or responding to men in the safest way. So when they do bring a concern, the reaction of the woman can also create more of that problem in men. So, a lot of women can take a man's loss of erection really personally, like it means something about how they look. It, means something about what they're doing. And, then what happens is when they react, withdraw, they feel bad, then the man feels really guilty because he's feeling guilty because now she's feeling like that. And it's because he lost his erection when actually he was really turned on and enjoying it. And for some reason, his cock wasn't behaving how he wanted to. And that was just what was happening. And all of this, huge things just ends up feeling blown up out of proportion. Then the next time that the man comes for that sexual contact or encounter, in the back of their mind, there's just like fear of, is it going to happen again? Because if it does, it's that whole process of upsetting my partner is going to start. And if we can turn around and like offer that conversation in a really vulnerable way and turn around and say, I understand that my loss of erection feels unnerving to you, and you may feel that what you're doing wasn't very good, or you may feel that it means that I don't find you attractive. Just to let you know, I think you're really hot and I'm really enjoying what we do. I just ended up getting in my head in one point, and I was thinking about what I needed to do tomorrow, or, I ended up, being self-conscious about what I was doing, because I do speak to a lot of men who worry about how they look in bed. So, as they're there intimate with another woman, like they might be worried about how their own genitals look, or, do I look good in this position, and getting into their own heads, which can then can cause a loss of an erection. And so just, I think, opening up that conversation and showing that vulnerability of saying, look, I understand how you might be feeling about my loss of erection, but actually what's happening for me is, this happened, my head being elsewhere, and actually, it's this is what happens sometimes, and it's fine, and we can talk a little bit more. Do you have any questions? And just opening up that conversation, because as much as I try to educate as many women as possible about, men and how their bodies work, I think also it would be good for men to be able to explain to their partners about how their own bodies work. So I encourage women to share with their male partners about their menstrual cycle and how they feel at different times of the month. And it would be great if their partners just knew all of that, but they don't. I'm in my 40s, so I'm attracting quite a lot of women at the moment who are in their 40s and 50s. So, offering them the information to their partner about perimenopausal symptoms, and, and so then when you turn it back onto the men, it's speaking to the men and saying, okay, can you offer and educate your partner on your body and how you feel, and all of those different elements that are at play when you show up sexually, and offering that information can then give the woman the opportunity to say, oh, wow, that's really interesting, because I feel really uncomfortable in being in this sexual position, because you can see this part of my belly that hangs funny and I feel really uncomfortable with that. And they're like, really? That's why you don't want to do that position? It just opens up that opportunity to really express things that feel extremely uncomfortable that actually lead to greater intimacy.
Yeah. And there's so many of the points there are things that I experience with my clients, is especially around this idea of the losing erection, the meaning. We talked a bit about meaning and personalization before, right? And it's this what happens for, we're talking about men here. So what happens for women is that a man loses erection, and there's this instant association that they've done something wrong. I've done something wrong. And there's two ways of kind of receiving that I've done something wrong. Again, the man hasn't said anything. He has just lost his erection, right? You've kind of touched on, I must add, is a very normal thing to happen during any sort of sexual activity for a man's erection to fluctuate from being hard to semi to soft. It's very, very normal. And I can vouch and say this happens to me very regularly, right? And the internalization the woman kind of does in her own mind is like, I've done something wrong. And there's kind of two ways that there's multiple ways, but there's often two ways that we deal with this negatively. Either we internalize and go, there's something wrong with me, and we withdraw and we blame ourselves and something like that. Or we have to then project. We don't want to feel that sensation that we've done something wrong. So we have to push that to someone else. So it's like in that moment, that man's there. So it's like he must have done something to create this to happen. And I see this a lot with men. It's like you've kind of described it, is they get to a point where they feel quite scared to have sex. Their sexual confidence really becomes eroded because they go into sex worrying like, if my erection goes, I'm going to receive her reaction to that. And I don't want her to feel bad about herself and then that makes me feel bad about myself. And we kind of set up this emotional dynamic where sex becomes something we try and actively avoid because we don't want to have to be with the feelings and emotions of like failure or making our partner feel bad or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly that. And also, it's also good to see a loss of erection as an opportunity as well, like for exploration, because I think for most people actually that I speak to, there's so much of a focus on like penetration, and that good sex means that you're going to orgasm at the same time, that you're going to orgasm. For women, they're going to orgasm from penetration, when only 20% of women are able to do that. And I think, how can you reframe it that a loss of an erection gives you an opportunity to then go into flow into a different area of sex, maybe like experiencing oral sex, and also changing the relationship as well to a flaccid cock, because, a flaccid cock feels different to a hard one. And so where can I get the appreciation as a woman and how can a man appreciate his own flaccid cock as well? Because I hear really frequently, a lot of men that when they're, before or after sex, when they aren't, showing signs of arousal with an erection, will hide themselves because they experience shame because, maybe they're a little bit smaller before they have an erection. And so there's a little bit of discomfort around being seen fully naked. And it's like, inviting a man to fully love his own flaccid penis, and then inviting women to enjoy playing with the flaccid penis, and sometimes in a non-sexual way as well, just like having that curiosity of like how it feels, because it feels completely different, and it feels softer. It feels more comforting in a way. Like, if I speak from my own experience interacting with flaccid to erect, and if you can appreciate it in that sense, it completely takes the pressure away from both of you and of the man needing to be hard, because the pleasure doesn't need to be necessarily even sexual arousal. It can be receiving touch that just feels nice because maybe you enjoy having fingers tickling your back, and then and the pleasure from that can be similar to having that type of touch on a flaccid penis, so having that opportunity to explore and receive touch in a completely different way that isn't erection and penetration focused, and that in itself, that curiosity and playfulness really opens up the door to intimacy and lots of different possibilities as well.
Yeah, it's a real a lot of the confidence issues that I observe with men is it's a lot about what they think things should be like when they're not like that. For instance, as you've described already, is around you say about around soft cock and men feeling shame, like, oh, I don't want her to see my soft flaccid penis, because they have this idea that only a hard cock has value, like a soft penis is useless, there can be no joy, and they should be ashamed of it in some way. And I always remember, I think, I'm trying to think who it was. Amy from Temple of the Feminine came on the podcast a while ago, and she said something. She was just like, soft cocks are fucking beautiful too, and soft cocks can feel pleasure as well. And I think this is a really valuable kind of view to take. Is that, as you're talking about there, like just becoming comfortable with your flaccid penis, both men and women, because it still has as much value. There's still pleasure that can be gained with it. There's nothing wrong with it being soft. It shouldn't be hard all the time. It'd be very uncomfortable if it's that way anyway. So it's like shifting our mindset about how we kind of treat our penis. It's like we actually can be quite, we can actually be really quite mean about this very important object, this very beautiful object that we have. Like, we always wanting it to be a certain way that it's not. So we are creating the shame, and we're creating the lack of confidence in our own minds continuously out throughout our days and our lives as we go through. And then we expect, in the moment that we want it to be the way we want it to be, that it should just do what it is meant, or what we believe it's meant to do, aka get hard for an indefinite, pretty much length of time until we decide it should stop being hard.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, as you said, having a different relationship to your penis outside of sex as well, I think is really important. So like, practice that I'll give to some men is setting a timer throughout the day. So every hour, every couple of hours, depending on the work schedule. And when the timer goes off, just bringing awareness to their actual genitals. And this can really change how a man sees his genitals, because there's very much a sort of almost like a taking approach to the way a lot of men interact with their genitals. Like, it needs to give me an orgasm. It needs to help me ejaculate. It's going to help me penetrate this woman. And, rather than noticing, so the timer goes off, just being aware any sensations, maybe there aren't, maybe there's numbness there, noticing the thoughts that pop up in your head, noticing any emotions, any stories that you have, maybe noticing how you feel, bringing awareness to your penis while other people maybe are in the room, and like the discomfort that comes with that, because, it's so much as well that sexualization, like you were saying, like that, what the penis is there for and what it should be doing, and creating a new relationship with the penis. And also, bringing self-pleasure practices, again, that aren't focusing necessarily on erection, but like experiencing pleasure for the sake of pleasure, rather than how can I touch myself to get an erection? So removing that as a goal too, like how can I experience different sensations on different areas of my genitals and enjoy it without the goal being for me to get an erection and come at the end of
it. Yeah. It's, I always say this is that as men, we bring the kind of patriarchy into our sex, which is, when I say that, what I mean is we bring this idea that we must be winning and we must be hitting a goal. And it's only good and useful if we're hitting goals. And we bring that same idea into sex, which really erodes our confidence, because as you said there, it's like, and I'm just going to add this in, because like when I say sex, I don't just mean penetration. And I know Carla feels a very similar way from what she said already. It's like, when we say sex, people, we're meaning like everything. Well, I really mean anything from like thinking about sex to kissing, to caressing, to touching, to penetration, to the aftercare of hugging and so forth afterwards. It's a very big umbrella for me. So when we think about sex, it's like we bring this idea, what happens, we bring this idea of winning and needing to get to an end goal, and that it's only very binary, that it's good if these things happen and it's bad if anything else happens. And I wanted to ask a question actually around kind of the things that hurt sexual confidence. It's something that I see with a lot of the men that come to me are two things that they think are hurting their sexual confidence. And I wonder, I'd love to know your thoughts on whether you think these things are really negatively affecting sexual confidence. One of them is sexual experience. Like a lot of men who kind of come to work with me who are not very sexually experienced, they feel very shy about sex. They assume they're not very good at it because they haven't had loads of it. Though generally, when I ask them what loads means, they're very woolly on the being able to be exact with what that is. And the second thing is knowledge. feel they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the information, they don't have the sexual wisdom, should we call it? And I love to get your thoughts on like, how does these two things affect men's sexual confidence?
So I think the thing around experience tends to be, as you just already said, it's like that patriarchal idea. You know, men are generally conditioned to just know things. Like they're conditioned to not ask for help. They're conditioned to not know. They need to have solutions, and they need to be fixing things. And it needs to, you know, they need to always be in a leading mindset, and they not allowed to ask for help or not allowed to not know. And I think that is at the detriment to you know, men and their experience, you know, their experience sexually. Because just because you've had lots of experience doesn't mean that you are necessarily going to get a woman to orgasm. The reason being is a lot of women fake orgasms. So the orgasm gap is around 30 to 60% for women, depending on the research and the statistics. And, you know, only 20% of women orgasm from penetration alone. So the amount of men that believe that they're having a partner that orgasms all the time, and most men think that they are having a partner that orgasms all the time, what's often happening is that they're not doing. And the woman's not communicating that. She's giving the impression or outright lying about having an orgasm. So some men that may have had, in inverted commas, lots of experience, actually, you know, may not know how to support a woman to get to orgasm or experience pleasure. Because if you've been doing the same thing over and over again, and people haven't been telling you that it needs to be different or it needs to change, then you're going to continue doing that. So experience really doesn't equate to being very good. When it comes to knowledge, I think knowledge is important in the sense of having a general idea of the female anatomy. And there's a really great book called Women's Anatomy of Arousal by Sherry. I don't know. Do you know the book, David?
No, I don't.
Yeah, so it's called The Women's Anatomy of Arousal, and it's a really, really great book, and it explains sort of the different areas of female genitals, and you know, the different processes of how to see if a woman's getting aroused. And so having that information, that generic information, is really good to give you confidence then to be able to have a conversation. The reason being is every woman's different, just like every man's different. You know, some men like the balls being tickled, some like them being pulled, some like them being squeezed. How do you know that as a woman? You need to ask the question. You know, some men don't even like the balls being touched. So you need to have that question. And it's exactly the same for women. Like some women like direct stimulation on the clitoris. A lot of women don't. You know, they prefer it on a particular part of the hood. Maybe they prefer the stimulation, you know, on the inner labia a little bit higher up, but not even on the hood. And like, you can't know that. You just can't know. And also, you know, I've seen lots of different vulvas myself. And, you know, I'll be honest, as a woman, it's not always very clear where the clitoris is. I know that that's like an ongoing joke around, like, where's the clitoris? And, you know, I'm going to hold my hand up here, and having seen quite a few different vulvas, I'm not always 100% clear where they are. It's like, you know, this seems like it's the head, and that looks like it might be the clitoris, because sometimes it's hiding, sometimes it's poking out, because they're all so different. And so, you know, asking questions like, you know, higher or lower, left or right, more pressure, less pressure, rather than do you like this? Because then the woman feels under pressure to say yes or no, and that feels really uncomfortable. So asking for directions to things is a better conversation to actually saying to her, is this good or is that good? Or, you know, so asking for more clear information. So would you prefer for me to be higher or lower, or to the left, to the right? You know, more pressure, less pressure, more speed, less speed. And so, I think it's having the confidence, not in sex, but I think in communication. And also, you know, having the confidence in getting it wrong, knowing that every single woman's different, and what worked for your last partner doesn't mean it's going to work for this one. And having to a certain extent, relearn somebody else's body. And rather than seeing that as like a negative, if this is like an opportunity for exploration and play and curiosity, and like anyone who follows Esther Perel will say, that that's where the best part of the relationship is, when you're learning about somebody. And so how can you really lean into the learning and the curiosity and see it as a place of, of opportunity to learn about a new person and reframe it in that way.
Beautiful. And I love everything you said. And there was a question that just kept it felt like my intuition is banging in my head. The question is do women expect men to know what to do sexually? Really, do they expect men to know what to do sexually?
Unfortunately, yes, they do, and this is really frustrating for me. But this is not just sexually. This is men and women. We expect the other person to know what our needs are. We expect them to know why we're upset. We expect them to know. So this isn't just around sex. This is just one of the problems of being a human. And, it comes back a lot to the whole inner child stuff that I was talking about. You just want somebody to know. You're looking to be rescued in some way. You're looking for somebody to get you. You're looking for this romantic idea of things just flowing and being in place without needing to talk about it. And unfortunately, it's not like that. And as much as women expect men to just know, I do find that men expect women to just know as well. Women don't know that men feel really, some men can feel really uncomfortable being naked and their genitals being on show. We have this idea as women that men are really confident sexually, so if a man is hiding himself, we think it's about us, and we don't think actually maybe they're, not feeling confident and it's their stuff. And so I think there's, definitely an element there of how we think other people are doing and why they're doing it. Like we were saying before, rather than having the conversation and asking and getting vulnerable and curious and seeing it as an opportunity of connection. And also as well, having those opportunities to talk about sex and what you like and what you don't like, that can be a turn on in itself. It can be an opportunity for creating that sort of sexual currency, that build up of, what we could do to each other later. So seeing those conversations as an opportunity of building the sexual tension. I hope that answers your question. So yes, women do expect, unfortunately, they do expect men to just know what they're doing. But I think that's a human thing anyway, that we tend to want and expect everybody to just know how we're feeling and what's coming up for us.
Yeah. It kept coming to my head and I was like, oh, wow. I feel like we want people, and this is my experience has been with women, is we want people to know our body better than we do, so that we don't have to do the uncomfortable thing of vocalizing things or making anyone feel guilty by being like, oh, I'm not actually, could you move slightly to the left? I don't enjoy that, or that's too much. We don't want to feel the guilt of oh, I'm telling you off, or inverted commas, or I'm telling you what to do, or cause any shame. So if you just intuitively know exactly how to touch me, then this is easier for both of us, which when we think about that is really fucking crazy, right? Because as you've said, every woman, I can say that I've had enough experience sexually and been with enough women to know that women are vastly, very, very different in many ways. And I think this is what kind of frustrates me about the conversation that happens sometimes around the orgasm gap, because I think often it's framed as if it's men's fault. And I'm going to come out and say this really clearly. And it's I don't believe it's men's fault. I think there's some responsibility in there, definitely, in that some men are very lazy and they don't have any knowledge and they don't make an effort. But my experience of being with women is that they don't communicate. They communicate very badly. We all communicate very badly, as we were talking about before. We all communicate really badly. But when it gets into kind of sexual experience, we expect the other person to know exactly how to touch us and where all our bits and pieces are, because we assume almost that we are just like everybody else. There's some sort of almost entitlement to being like, well, me, David, sexually is very similar to another man. So if you're giving me a hand job and this hand job feels really shit for me, I'm like, well, you must be shit at hand jobs, instead of thinking, oh, the people that you have been with have enjoyed something different, or they haven't enjoyed something different, but they've never corrected you. And I feel that we have to take a lot more responsibility, individually, men and women, for our sexual pleasure and what we desire, and communicating that, and not expect that the people we're with can guess. Because as you said, like, every vulva it can be so subtly different in its makeup and its color and where things are. And then you add into the fact that most of us are having sex in a way that is pretty dark. And also the fact that as men, we don't have vulvas. So I can't know exactly what it feels like to have one, because I don't have one. So I'm always going off secondhand information. I'm trying to read this woman I'm with, her body language, how she moves. And, it can take some time to be adept to that, because we have to there's a whole conversation around presence and stepping outside of our fear and being in the moment with the person we're with. But also we have to attune to that person, because some people can be very quiet and they breathe very softly during sex and they really enjoy it very subtly. And some people have massive movements and sounds and groans and all sorts. So I think as I get back to my frustration around the conversation about the orgasm gap, and I think it exists, but it's that we have to really take responsibility individually. And you've said this, we have to take individual responsibility for communicating. Like, I like this, I don't like this, I like to be touched like that. Can you actually, you're doing that thing, could you just shift to the left or to the right a little bit? Because as much as scary as that is how we get what we want. That's how we get the pleasure we want, by communicating. And I think that this gap would shrink massively. We've said this. If people could just have a conversation and be like, I'm not too scared to talk about sex. Let's have this conversation about how I like to have sex, and it could be transformational to people. But instead we want to put up statistics and almost brand men as like all being bad and lazy, when I think that there's also a conversation to be had around, and I'm just going to say it really plainly, I think there's a conversation to be had around women communicating that what they like, desire, and what brings them pleasure, and men asking the questions as well. But I think we should be, I had Lola Jean on the podcast, and she said something that I really agree with. And she was like, we are all responsible for our own pleasure and orgasm. And if we acted that way, we'd get a lot more of it, instead of placing responsibility on someone else. I can tell that was a big rant by me. It just kind of fell out my mouth.
Yeah, no, but I absolutely agree with you. And in fact, there was a study done, I think it was in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, around why women fake orgasms. And one of the, there were lots of different reasons, but a lot of it was worried about their partner cheating on them. So a lot of it was to keep the man there, or to keep the man happy. One of the things that came up was also protecting his ego. So even though, like, any women listening to this, and I know women listen to the podcast, is any women listening to this, be brave, ask for what you want. For the men that are listening, if a woman's being brave and asking for what she wants, like, this is a positive. And I know there's going to be a certain part of you that goes, oh, I'm not good enough. My other partners never did this. Why is she the one that's being difficult? Why is she, she's the one that's got the problem, because this has worked with everybody else, and just taking a moment and acknowledging that there's a certain element of bravery of asking for what you want and encouraging her to do that, and just checking in with what that brings up for you. And then that will give women that boost to then come back and say yes a little bit to the left, softer, harder, faster, whatever it might be. So definitely women speaking up more, but then also men having the ability to listen to that and just to hold that as well, and not take it so personally. And, if no woman has ever directed you, I don't really want to use that word, I can't think of anything on the top of my head that sounds better than that, but if no woman has ever sort of given you an inclination of where or how, then it's very likely that, you weren't doing the right thing that made her orgasm. It's highly unlikely that she was experiencing the pleasure that maybe that she was communicating to you. And that's not necessarily your fault as a man. But then moving forward with this knowledge that you're now getting from this podcast is, okay, so how can I create that space so that women in the future feel comfortable communicating their needs with me. And then
you just asked my next question. Well,
no, so what was the question?
No, how can we create the space to encourage people to be brave and share their needs? And I guess also the other side is how can we create a space that encourages our partners to be curious as well, to create both those spaces that are necessary?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that awareness comes from, what does it bring up for me? And you said it yourself, David, it's being mindful of what that brings up for me, how I feel about it, which is all very valid. It's gonna touch something within you, some story that you may have about yourself, some core wound. I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm feeling rejected right now. Whatever it might be, being aware of that and just being mindful then to not sort of be defensive or be on the, attack, or to then not criticize back or to withdraw, So, and then to ask the question and then get curious, like if they've asked for you to go a little bit further left, rather than going, no one's ever directed me before. Like, everything that I've done has been fine with previous partner, because we're feeling an element of not being good enough. Maybe turn around and going, okay, oh gosh, that felt really uncomfortable to hear. So I'm just going to do what I was asked of, which is move further to the left and say, is there the place, and just be able to hold that and maybe have a conversation after the sexual encounter when you're having a cuddle and just share vulnerably, like, oh, I've never had somebody ask me before. And I'll be honest, it felt really uncomfortable. I do want you to share what you like and what you don't like. But, that felt like a bit of an edge for me. Like I've never really had anyone communicate with me around sex. And I think a lot of it boils down to that, the fact that we go into sexual encounters not talking about anything related to sex, and we're expected to make it work in some way. And so having conversations about sex before you have sex is a really important thing. I mean, I spent a couple of years non-monogamous, and I sort of like the sexual exploration and liberation that I should have like maybe had in my 20s. I did it a couple of years ago, and a lot of the men that I interacted with, because being a sex coach and quite open about talking about sex, a lot of the men that I interacted with at the time felt quite uncomfortable talking about sex because they'd never had those conversations, and they'd not really come across a woman who would say, oh, I like it like this, or can we do this? A lot of women tend to be passive in that way and allow the man to move them and do things, and allow the man to sort of in a way take control. And so, yeah, and I think it was quite confronting for them to have that conversation. But also I feel that, the way that I did it was understanding that they might find that difficult, and holding that space for any discomfort that came up for them meant that they were able to listen from a place maybe of more of safety, rather than feeling criticized or blamed, or, however else they might personally take it. So, and I think the confidence of talking about sex feels so much safer than not having any conversation at all. Because if somebody feels confident in how they talk about sex, then that in itself can create a sense of safety, because it's like this person feels grounded and sure in themselves, what they want, having this conversation, that I feel able then to open up and be with them and talk about what it is that I like and what I don't like, because, when I go, for example, into network meetings and I meet women and I openly talk about sex, a lot of the women there say, oh, because you talk so confidently and comfortably about it, it makes me feel more comfortable as well. Because if I went in there timid and shy with an element of discomfort about how I'm talking about it, that then transmits to the person I'm speaking to. So having that confidence within ourselves and practicing those conversations, how we want to say things, how we want to ask for things, maybe practicing them in front of a mirror, means that when we go and have those conversations, we are more sure in ourselves. And also getting really clear on what you want and what you don't want, because the clearer that we are on what our own needs are and what our own desires are, the clearer that we are on what we would like to do to another person as well, the easier it is then to talk about it, because we know what we want. And I imagine for you, David, when you're talking about dating, it's something similar. Like, you go into dating knowing exactly what you want from a relationship. Exactly the same for sex. You need to get clear. Otherwise, you just end up going off on different tangents and or maybe not even talking about it. And you find yourself falling into something that doesn't work because you don't know. You don't have an agreement. You don't know what the container is. And that's where the discomfort comes from, because it's like, should I do this or shouldn't I do this? How will they react if I do that? Because we don't know. People have got a lot of their own baggage, especially when it comes to sex, and they can have been touched in a way, both men and women can be touched in a way that wasn't pleasurable in the past. And that can be a trigger for them. And if that's not being talked about, you then move into a sexual encounter. You don't know about that. You do it by accident because you're not aware of it. And then you take that personally, So having those uncomfortable conversations and being confident in what it is that you want and what it is that you want to bring to the conversation, I think helps create that space and that element of safety, and bringing awareness to what it might bring up for you as well, and being responsible for yourself in that.
Yeah, it's that self-awareness piece about our own desires and wants. And I wanted to say something that popped into my mind, because it's a conversation I had with a woman recently, and we're going to kind of hop back, and I'm loving this conversation. I did a panel talk at the Conjurer a few weeks back, and a woman came to me and she was like, when I try and have conversations with men when I'm dating them about sex, they immediately believe that I want to have sex with them. And I think the thing I want to say is men, it's great if a woman you're with starts to talk to you about sex. Now, that does not mean that she wants to have sex with you, actually. She's being curious about who you are as a sexual being and wanting to learn about you as a sexual being. And this is a conversation, and this is a bit, you mentioned this, Carla, around this almost like a type of building of sexual tension and sexual energy is like, oh, who is this person and can they hold this conversation? And it's a real turn on, and I speak for women here, but enough of them have told me, it's a real turn on to be with a man who can talk about sex, right? And be present and grounded in that moment. And it doesn't suddenly shift his energy into like him being like, well, we need to go and do this now, because if I don't do this now, this sex is going to disappear and run away, which is anxiety. So as to the men listening to it, it's really important that if you are having a conversation with a woman and does start talking to you about sex and what she enjoys and asking you what you enjoy, take some deep breaths, feel the ground, feel the soles of the feet on the ground, and answer honestly. Maybe the honest answer is, oh, I'm not really sure. I haven't tried that. What is that like? If it's something that she's experienced, or what I've enjoyed in the past is da-da-da-da-da. Because not knowing is okay. And, men, if you're listening to this, there's a part of your belief around lack of confidence that tells you that you shouldn't talk about the thing you lack confidence in. And it's a really important thing to notice in yourself. It's like, this might be sexually, it might be a relational thing, it might be work, whatever. It's a part of you that tells you, because you don't have confidence in something, you shouldn't speak about it, you should avoid it. When in fact, it's the very opposite that you need to do. Because to build confidence, as we've said over and over again today, is one of the first steps is to get clear for yourself, as Carla said just now, to get clear for yourself where your standpoint is and what you enjoy and like about that. But also to then have a conversation with other people, be that with friends, be that with a partner, be that with a prospective date or a coach or something like that, because it's this lack of confidence actually pushes you further away from having the experience you want, because you believe the story it tells you. And I'm thinking of a number of my clients, they come to me with a lack of confidence in dating or in relationship or sexually. And so what they've done is they just avoided those topics and subjects inside dating, or they don't date, or they don't get into relationships, or they don't have sex. When in fact, the desire, when the lack of confidence arises, it should be like, I need to be curious about this thing and lean towards it. And I know that sounds very counterintuitive, but the lack of confidence is not a sign that you should be moving away from that. And I want to circle back around to what Carla was saying about needs, because it's so important that we figure out for ourselves, like, what is it that we actually want? So much of sexual confidence from a man's point of view, I believe, is he wants to be sexually confident to do to others. Yeah. Do to the woman that he meets. Like, can I do sex to her well? is the kind of the thinking we're having. But Carla touched on this before, is like, it's so important to get clear on, like, what do you enjoy? What do you like? What brings you pleasure? What would you like to try that you haven't tried before? And this, one of the pieces of will help you build sexual confidence. And I guess the question for Carla is like, how can we, as men, as people, learn more about the things we don't know, or learn about what our sexual needs, wants, and desires are outside of, because there's also the influence of like conditioning and, the masculine conditioning of always being dominating and being in control, and the feminine conditioning around, being submissive and receiving. Like, how can we start to learn about what our needs are, truly what our needs are?
So there's a game, I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's called the yes, no, maybe game. And so there's a long list of like lots of different things about touch, about role play, so many different things. And sitting down and going through that either by yourself or with a partner, just to get really, really clear on things that, and this is why there's a maybe element to it, because there's things that, yes, you definitely know that you do like, and there's things like, no, definitely not ready. And there are things that are maybe. So, in the right context, I might try it, or I don't know if I'm going to like that, but I'm willing to try it and give it a go and see. And so that game can be really, really useful in opening up sort of the ideas to what's possible, and also having a conversation with somebody as well. And then when it comes to things like touch, something called pleasure mapping is really a good thing. So pleasure mapping is where you touch a person. So maybe you have, if you're a man, you have your partner touch you in lots of different places in lots of different ways, using lots of different utensils. Like, you don't need to buy anything fancy. You can just like use fingers, use silk scarves, use like a fork, so that you've got that roughness, cold metal, and just experience different parts of the body being touched with different utensils or different ways of the hands touching it. Because you may find experiencing that there's a particular type of touch that you like, that you thought that you might not do, or in a specific part of your body that you weren't aware of, because no one's really focused on that, because it's not considered one of the erogenous zones. And so it just gives you this opportunity to really experience touch in a very different way. And again, it's about coming back to the playful element of it as well, getting the enjoyment of that interaction, that curiosity. It's not about getting somebody to, as you were saying before, David, this patriarchal idea of getting a goal, let's get to orgasm, but, let's explore each other's bodies. Because also, what I find is how one person touches you feels very different to another person touching you as well. So even if somebody touches you lightly, with feather fingertips, it can feel very different to another person's like feather fingertips. So, with one person, that type of touch feels really good, but if somebody else is doing it, it's not as good. So again, a different person and the way that they touch you is going to bring up different things, and just having that curiosity of how this new partner, or even a partner that you've been with for, 20, 30 years, how you can maybe experience touch in a very, very different way. So that would be my suggestions with touch, and then also like actual things to do, the yes, no, maybe game. I have that resource. I don't know if you have that resource, David, but it's something that very likely you'd be able to Google and find it online. So, and there are so many different options. You can get one specific to particular types of sexual acts. So maybe some that are more BDSM focused, some that are reasonably vanilla focused. Or you can get ones that have the full spectrum and that have like so many different things on there that there'll be lots of terminology that you'll come across and you go, I have no idea what that is, and I need to go Google it. So, I would definitely suggest those two in opening up the possibility of actually, what is it that I would like to try? What is it that I know I like? And what else is out there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hadn't heard it as the yes, no, maybe. I use something multiple times, or sex menu.
Okay.
There's some that you can find online that are like sex menus, and they have all these different acts, and just like Carla was saying, and you can kind of sit down with your partner, and you can go through them and be like, okay, do I want to be pegged one day? Or, how do I feel about anal? How do I feel about someone touching? And we can go through these alone, to learn about ourselves and be like, oh, how do I feel about some of those things? And they can do this in partnership, and this is a lot of fun to do in partnership, because you will learn a whole load about your partner's sexuality that you may have never experienced before, because you just won't get to these conversations because they're things that are slightly outside of your awareness. And by just bringing in some new input from outside, you can bring these into your awareness and their awareness and have conversations about what you might like and enjoy as well.
Yeah, no, I love that.
And I'd love to touch on one more topic if you've got space and time for that.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So, because a piece inside of sexual confidence I think is really important is initiating of sex. And I work with a lot of men, and this becomes a real topic for men. Like, oh my God, initiating sex there becomes a lot of stress and anxiety, of expectation, of fear, of worry, of like not knowing how to do it right, not wanting to make mistakes. All these things come up. And actually, I've seen inside of many a men's relationship that I've worked with that the simple act of initiating sex stops them from the fear and the anxiety and all the emotions that come up around that, stop them from having sex. The relationship becomes not maybe completely sexless, but it becomes very low sex frequency, simply because the emotions around initiating sex become so intense and so difficult for the man to experience. So I'd love to explore with you, is talking about how can we learn to, I'm going to use this phrase, how can we learn to master the art of initiating sex?
So I think, the very first thing that I want to say is it's not an answer to that question, but I think it's a fear of rejection that is the barrier to initiating sex, because it's such a vulnerable thing to say, I want you, which is what we're saying. And then for them not to be feeling it in that moment feels like, I don't want you. And that can feel, that can feel crushing. So I just want to speak into that piece, first of all, and just to acknowledge that for a lot of men, that's likely what is coming up for them around initiation. And I had talked to you, I'd mentioned earlier in this podcast, before we started recording, around like the forgotten father. And, a lot of men, when they've had like children and they feel on the sidelines and the mother's so baby focused, this initiating of sex becomes even more and more difficult because she's tired and all of these different things, and they're feeling more distance, and it becomes more and more difficult to be able to do that. And it's also understanding that what sex means to men as well. And so this is why this question is just not so easy to answer, and it could probably be a podcast by itself, in all honesty. So, because again, it's like this conditioning for a lot of men that sex is the way to connect physically with their partner and also emotionally as well. And that comes from a lot of the conditioning that men get, that, that they're not to give each other hugs and they're not to share how they feel. And so the only place really that they have the opportunity to do that is with a female partner. And this isn't every man. This, I'm just speaking generically here. And so what happens is, a lot of men attach sort of the physical and emotional connection they have with their partner to sex itself. And so that's why the initiation of sex becomes important, because what they're sometimes actually asking for is a physical connection, where maybe a hug or a cuddle may be enough. It could be that they're looking for an emotional connection. Some men, can use masturbation and then in some ways sex as a way to relieve their day, to get the stress out of the body. So being mindful of that. And then, once you've taken all of those different things and you're fully understanding your own relationship to sex and to your own relationship to your own relationship, are you initiating from a place of desire for sexual intimacy, or is there some other type of need that hasn't been met or that you're looking to have met as well? So I think it's being aware of that. And, as a woman, I think like you can feel when a man is sort of approaching you because he's had a difficult day and he just needs to ejaculate to get rid of the stress. Like there's like, you have that sense, or, if he's desiring connection because he feels worried about the relationship or something along those lines, you have like this sense, you can feel it. And no doubt men will have that too in other areas of their lives when the women are reaching out to them for something that's not true to what they're actually saying. Does that make sense? Have I explained that well enough?
Totally.
Yeah,
really well.
So, and so I think it's being true to, what it is that you're initiating. And then if you can ask me the question, because I think all of those pieces were like really, I felt like I needed to have that discussion around initiation, and now I've forgotten what the actual question was around initiation. So was it how to do it?
Yeah, like how can men master the art of initiating sex?
Yeah, so I think that whole piece of getting clear on what it is that you're actually wanting to initiate is really important. And then, initiation is something that starts from like a text message or from a way that you look at your partner, specific exchanges that you may have. And also understanding as well, like there's an element with when it comes to initiation of understanding the dynamic around like desire as well. So like spontaneous and responsive desire. So that sometimes for women, to like sort of get going, it's not, going straight in for like the genitals. Might be okay at the beginning of a relationship with everything's hot and really, like there might be an element of chemistry there and a stronger desire for sexual connection. But as time passes, slowing things down and taking things really slowly and removing almost the goal of it having to go somewhere and being comfortable and happy with that like connection, and maybe taking things slower by the way that you approach a kiss or the way that you rub their feet or their legs, and again it's like with the whole intention that you're approaching it, that has a lot of transmission. So yeah, I hope, is there anything that you wanted to add to that, David? But like from my experience as a woman, it's definitely the energy of what you're coming in with. So is there a specific thing such as, you need to touch her hair first, and you need to touch like her back, and it's so nuanced, and there's so many different elements at play with regards to where you are in your relationship, where you are in your communication, how much sex you're having generally, how is your partner somebody that has a lot of spontaneous desire, or does she have more responsive desire? Let me just explain what those two are. We've likely covered it on other podcasts before, but for people that are listening right now, so spontaneous desire is like, you see something, you notice something, and it creates this sexual urge for you, and then you're ready for sex. And a responsive desire is more along the lines of, somebody will be massaging my foot, getting maybe closer to my thighs. There's a lot more sexual intent there. And then I respond to that sexual interest. So, so being aware of your own partner and how they respond, are they more spontaneous in their desire? Or are they somebody that responds more to physical touch and interaction? So having an understanding in a longer term relationship, I would say, of that, creating those connections on the run up. So with things like text messages, touching, particular looks, and then in a newer relationship, initiating, I think is something that maybe you can even have a conversation around, like why not have a conversation around it? How do you like sex to be initiated? Are you somebody that, prefers to be touched, or is it just like you can see anything and then you're like up for it? So don't be afraid to have those conversations at the beginning of a relationship. If you know your partner really well, initiating long term, I think is a lot easier. But if you're unsure, maybe having a conversation and sitting down and having a chat to them about it again could be a good way of of moving forward and understanding what you both would like, what would feel good as means of initiation.
Yeah. No, I just totally agree with so much of all of what you said. Is like the initiating of sex isn't just the moment you touch someone or the moment you go to kiss them. It's like the build up to that. We can start initiating sex 3 days before we have sex. It can be like the initiating of sex. I always kind of talk to men about is like the environment. Of the moment that you start to initiate. When I say start in this context, what I mean is like maybe you start the touching or the seductive words. Like, where are you? What's the environment? Because this will play a really big part. For those of you who've ever done psychedelics, the set and setting are very important, not just for psychedelics, but sexually as well. And I think I saw some research from someone flash up on my Instagram not too long ago about the set and setting. So the mindset you're having at the moment when you're doing it, and the setting, which is what's around you, what sort of place are you in, how safe do you feel, how comfortable are you, how warm is it? Like, is there possibly other people can see you, or other people could burst in the door, and all these sorts of things, or even down to the setting is like, what happens in this room normally? Like, if you're in a room where you work all the time, is that room kind of tinged with the stress of work? Or is that room tinged with the joy of relaxation? Or are you in your children's playroom, for instance? Like, what's the context of the room can really make a difference to people. That's why I imagine most people probably have more sex on holiday and when they're in hotels and stuff, simply because they're not in their usual environment, and this new environment doesn't have the energy of the normal day-to-day environment. So thinking about that, thinking about the emotions that are feeding into that moment as well, I think are really important. Because why, and this might seem like a really strange thing to mention at this point, is like, it's why it's so important for, if you're in a relationship, to be looking at your resentments and your arguments that go unresolved, because you're going to find that this will really affect the amount of sex that you have in general, and initiating sex, it really will affect that. Because if you've had an argument that's unresolved, that's from a day or so ago, someone's going to be a lot less receptive to you sexually. So it's like resolving those things in a way that feels good for both people is really important. And yeah, there's so much that goes into initiating sex. And I know there's a lot of fear for men around rejection and around not being good enough, or the meaning of the no. If you initiate sex with your partner, she says, no, I don't fancy it tonight, I'm tired. Like, the meaning that we place on it. And I know we keep saying this through this episode, but I think I can't stress how important it is to be observing of the meaning and seeing it, because unconsciously you probably don't see a lot of it. The meaning we place on the yeses and nos from people, particularly the nos, we turn it in from them just expressing they just don't desire something now. We turn it into there is something wrong with us, and our being is being rejected. So it's to really notice for yourself, like, when your partner says no to your initiation, that you're like, oh, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with our relationship. She doesn't love me anymore. She doesn't like me, and so forth. Because those thoughts can lead to, and this is, I've met and spoken to and coached men who this has happened to, it's led to them going outside of a relationship for sex. And I'm not saying this for those of you listening to this going, oh my God, I can never say no to my partner because then they'll cheat on me. No, what I'm saying is the thoughts of like, my partner doesn't want me because they say no to sex, they don't love me, and blah, 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 can lead you to thinking that you need to go elsewhere, when really it may be is, how are you initiating sex? Are you bringing beautiful touch? Is the sex you're inviting your partner into, is it an invitation into like deep connection and love? Or are you only offering them something that isn't something they really desire? Carla was talking about, sometimes we have sex because we are wanting to let go of tension from the day, or we want some emotional connection and so forth. And those are all valid ways, like I've definitely had some tension relieving sex in my time, even in my relationship now, and that's all well and good. But it's to be mindful of like, is that the only type of sex you offer? Is that the only flavor and texture of sex you're offering? But if that's not the flavor and texture your partner likes, let's take this into ice cream analogy. If you keep offering your partner chocolate ice cream and they don't like chocolate ice cream, they're going to say no to chocolate ice cream, right? But if they like strawberry, right, and you never offer them strawberry, right, in your initiation, then, you're going to end up with this result. So it's like bringing in the different textures of sex to your partner. And this is why, and we've talked about this so many in the Mushrooms episode, is like having conversations, because then you start to learn about the texture and the type of sex that your partner desires. And then you can work on co-creating that together and initiating that sort of sex in those sorts of places, so that the no's, not so much the no's become less, it's just that both of you start getting more of what you want.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to that, because yes, there is a strong element, and like with the women that I also coach, is there is that element of, and actually research shows that the more orgasms women have, the more orgasms they want. And because, as we've already established, sometimes women are faking orgasms. What can happen is, in those dynamics, when they're not being honest and truthful, they keep trying to keep the man happy by keeping him around, by, pretending that they're having orgasms. Then they stop wanting the sex, because the sex isn't really what they want, like the type of sex that you're getting, that they're actually getting. So yeah, thank you for speaking to that, David, because that is a huge part of it, because you're not going to want sex if it's just like, have a bit of a kiss, bit of foreplay, penetration, ejaculation, the end, like if that's the thing over and over again. There's a lot of research that shows that women have, desire for a lot of variety. There's a really great book by Wednesday Martin, who really speaks to this, about women and, women's, actually naturally promiscuous, but it's a social conditioning that sort of means that they're not able to feel that they can express their sexual selves. And so, opening that space for a woman to really tap into her full sexual expression by creating that safe space and having those conversations means that she's going to be more willing and wanting to have the sex with you, because she knows that it's going to be different and it's going to be lots of curiosity and play. And yeah, so absolutely, if you're feeling that you're getting lots of no's, maybe exploring what the sex is that you're offering, the environment, and noticing if there's any other way that you can create an environment that she is going to say yes more. And then the other thing that you said as well around resentment, like the Gottman Institute, they talk about that. And they talk about the importance of complaining. And this, women tend to be better at complaining than men. They use the word complaining, which I know some people probably retract right now, but what they're referring to with complaining is, there's that little thing that your partner did that annoyed you, letting them know in a nice way. Obviously, delivery is really important. Coming from a place of criticism, anger, resentment, passive aggressive comments, all of those different things are not going to be supportive. But letting somebody know that something has upset you enables you to let it go. And they use the analogy of like a pipe, and every little thing that you don't let go ends up building up in this pipe. And they use like the analogy of like feces building up in the pipe. And then what happens is you get it gets built up to such an extent that then all of a sudden your partner explodes over something that appears to be really small, and it's actually nothing to do with that small thing. It's all of the smaller things that have built up. So if you're, allowing those feces to, those little complaints to pass through that pipe on a regular basis, you're keeping that pipe clear, which means that she is more open and able to be receptive to the initiation as well. And, even though women tend to be quite good at that, any women listening, I would very much invite you to bring awareness to how you are communicating those, because passive aggressive comments, criticism, all of those different things just shut the other person down and don't leave them open to acknowledging or maybe even wanting to change or do something different or understand your perspective. And men who are listening to this that receive the passive aggressive comments or the criticism, my invitation is to you to set boundaries around that. So to say to your partner, I understand that you're not happy that I did X, Y, and Z, but please don't speak to me like that. You're well within your rights to receive information that you need, but it also needs to be delivered in a nice way as well. So my invitation to both, being mindful of how you're communicating these things, and to men to also communicate your complaints as well, because it will help you build that better connection with your partner. Because quite often, when we know that something has upset our partners, at least, I speak personally for myself, when I find out that something's happened and he's not happy about it, I feel like, I didn't realize that. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I get to see the part of him that feels let down, or, that he felt he didn't feel considered in that moment. And I'm like, really, thank you for sharing that. And for me, that brings, that element of connection, because, they're asking for something. And if they're asking for something, it means that they want the relationship and they want it to work. So, I just wanted to add a little bit of extra onto those points that you made there, David.
And that's a really important piece you said there is, and I work with a lot of avoidant men, and they're like, they don't really want to voice their complaints because they don't want to be seen to be complaining, and they have anxious partners. And actually their anxious partners receive complaint in a different meaning of like, oh, this means you want the relationship in because the opposite, the silence that they often do, the shutting down, they're not expressing, they receive that as you don't care about this relationship, you're not that interested, and that's a really, really important piece to add in there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And, maybe it's because I'm more anxiously leaning for myself. Yeah, it feels like a connection, but I do know that also for secure relationships, communication of how you're feeling and, little complaints and things that you want to bring up also helps build that connection. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And we're gonna stop there because we've gone way over what we intended to. But I just felt like there was just so much coming through for the listeners in what we had there. And I think it's so golden. We've really talked about the sexual confidence, the how to have great sex, like initiating, like the blocks. Like, it's been a fantastic episode, and I just, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you, Carla. I feel very excited towards the end of the conversation. We've had this, and I've got like a whole page of notes and stuff that I'm going to add into the intro. But I'm sure the listeners are dying to find out where they can find you, how they can work with you, how you're supporting people both in group and individually.
Yeah, so I just want to say, thanks, David, for having me on, because I do listen actually to your podcast. So I think there's only about 3 or 4 that I listen to on a regular basis, and yours is one of them. And also my partner listens to your podcast. And I've not told him that I'm coming on, so it's going to be quite interesting when he sees me pop up an Apple podcast. Hang on a minute. so that's going to be interesting. So, and then where to find me. So my I do one-to-one coaching on Zoom. So I work internationally with people. My website is carlacrivaro.com. I'm on Instagram. I think you'll pop everything in the show notes, so I don't need to give you all of that information. And I'm looking to start a group program for women, actually, called Men Are Not the Enemy. So I'm just in the moment, like, speaking to my business coach and trying to get a full understanding of how, like, I'm going to make that work. So if there are any women that are listening to your podcast that are interested in, having a better relationship with men, and they're on David's podcast because they're like, I want to understand men better, then, that might be for them. And then for men, to come directly through my website, if they're looking for like one-to-one support, or even maybe support in their couples, in their relationships that way. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. Beautiful. This has been a enthralling conversation, to some of the most important aspects of relating, of sexual relating, especially that, we're just not taught these things, this idea that we should know, and we're just not taught how to do this, and we have to learn. It's a skill set, this is a skill set that we get to learn, we get to educate in ourselves, and it can be so joyful to do so. And I'm just so grateful that we got to have this conversation today. Listeners, if you've enjoyed this conversation, I'd love you to rate and review. Actually, just go down to whatever you're using, Spotify or Apple. You can give some stars and a little view, because it does help more people see the podcast. Because this is very much a labor of love that I've been in for 4 or 5 years now. But it's also really beautiful to hear from you. So if you've enjoyed this episode, if you've taken something from it, feel free to reach out to myself or Carla through the means that are inside the show notes. And let us know what you're taking away from the episode. So just last to say, thank you for listening. Thank you, Carla, for your wisdom and your beautiful energy. And listeners, until next week, Ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. You know, it's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. You know, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them. You know, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you know, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.